Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 9th edition of JBDC in Concert. Can't believe that we've been at this for 9 weeks, been talking and finding solutions and just having loads of fun for 9 weeks. We've been home for 9 weeks and working. Our topic today is right now. And let me give you a little background on JBDC in Concert. I am seeing some of you who I've been seeing for all 9 weeks. Thank you so much for joining us again. It means that you have been satisfied with the information that you've been getting. JBDC in Concert is a collaboration between JBDC, Jamaica Business Development Corporation, and the British Council. Both entities have been engaged since 2019, taking a hard look at the cultural and creative industries in Jamaica with a view of conducting a mapping which will lead to the overall development of the sector through targeted strategies that will be implemented based on information garnered from the research that is being done. And we have been at this for a couple of months now, the research aspect of it. And one of the things that we want to do to further engage our creatives, we started last year with the, in a big way, we have always done it, but last year we zoomed in on the orange economy at our annual Small Business Expo and Conference. And I'm not sure how many of you were there, but it was epic, it was great. And that's where this really began in a big way for us, focusing on monetizing the orange economy and so on. Jamaica is filled to the brim, overflowing with creativity. We are among the most entrepreneurial people globally, according to the Global Entrepreneurship Index. It's no joke. We love entrepreneurship in this country. But we want our creatives to understand that your talent, your art, is more than a thing you do. It's more than a thing you like to do. It's not a hobby. It's something that you ought to monetize, treat it as a business, and make money. And so JBDC in Concert is continuing that intervention. And over the last 9 weeks, we've looked at general areas such as financing, marketing, personal branding, digital transformation, virtualizing your vibe amid COVID-19. We've looked at building a team. Some of you love to do it alone because you're just a writer who can help you write, but there are other things that people can help you to do, even though you are the writer. And we have begun to look at specific industries since the month of May. We've looked at fashion and gift and craft. We've looked at music. Last week, we looked at dance and theater. And this week, we are bringing in the writers. Now, if you really think critically about the creative and cultural industries, you would almost admit that writers somewhat form the backbone of that. And what do I mean by that? The music you listen to, somebody wrote those lyrics. The plays you watch, the films you watch, all of those things you enjoy, somebody wrote it. The books you read, somebody wrote it. So you begin to see a clear picture of just how essential writers are. When you log on to the internet, that information that you find, whether it be on a website or a social media site, somebody wrote it. So writers are all over, and we are essential. I say we because I am a writer myself. I'm a communications practitioner. My entire team, as a matter of fact, we're all writers. And so today, we want you to write now. And as we've done in all previous 8 sessions, we've brought in the experts, because JBDC in Concert is in concert with whoever we find out there that wants to work in concert with us, right? And so this week we've brought in the experts, and we have Tanya Batson-Savage. If you read the Gleaner from way back, not saying Tanya all, you know, but that's the first place I saw that name, and it remained etched in my mind. That's the thing about print, by the way, it's forever. Tanya Batson-Savage, she's an author and the CEO of Blue Banyan Books. Welcome her. Latoya West-Blackwood is president of the Book Industry Association of Jamaica, and she's also a publisher. Kemal Brown is CEO of Digita Global Marketing. And I'm also very proud to welcome one of our own JBDC team members, Latoya Cross. She's an administrative assistant from our Mandeville Regional Office, and she recently released an anthology of poems. Latoya is going to give us a little bit of a different start this morning. We usually do our entertainment at the end, but we want to whet your appetite for what we're going to talk about. And so she will read a piece from her book entitled Pieces of Me, Journey of My Life Through Poetry. Latoya?
Good morning, everybody. So this piece is entitled, I Owe It to Myself. And you know, as we go about our daily life, we need to be reminded of what our purpose is and what we do owe to ourselves. I owe it to myself to live and not exist. I owe it to myself to create my own happiness. I owe it to myself to live my own truth. I owe it to myself to enjoy my youth. I owe it to myself to protect my peace. I owe it to myself to take good care of me. I owe it to myself to think before I act. I owe it to myself to think I am all that. I owe it to myself to put me first. I owe it to myself to be a part of this universe. I owe it to myself to never back down. I owe it to myself to always stand my ground. I owe it to myself to be the queen in my castle. I owe it to myself to never settle. If you see me surpassing everyone else, just remember that too I owe to myself.
Thank you, Latoya. And I owe it to myself to write now. Thank you so much, Latoya. All right, we're going to start off our conversation this morning with Tanya Batson-Savage. And she is going to address us for a few minutes about beyond the page towards songwriting and screenwriting. A lot of us, when we think of writing, we think only books. But as I said earlier, writing is so much more than that. Tanya is one who has the distinction of going beyond the page, and she is going to share with us this morning. Tanya?
Good morning, everybody. And first, I want to just say thank you to the JBDC and its team for continuing to do this. I think a lot of us creatives and even people just interested in the creative sector have really needed this in concert series, you know, in part just to keep your head straight and sometimes to gain focus and new perspectives. With that in mind, I thought that for this first few minutes of presentation, I would focus more on going beyond the page and what it means. And while I'll make reference to the possibilities of leveraging in screenwriting and songwriting, I wanted writers to think about the ways in which, while the page remains critical to what you do and how you do, this is, and I use the word opportunity very guardedly because, you know, there are ways in which there is space to reshape ourselves and to reshape what we do. And this becomes it seems that the keenest opportunity for this is poets. I would love to bring attention to what Olive Senior is doing on Twitter. The most important thing writers can do in this period is keep writing. And I say that because writing functions in multiple ways. For the writer, it gives you the opportunity to hone your craft. It gives you the opportunity to get ideas and experiences out of your head. But the rest of the world, and I'm not the one inventing the statement, the rest of the world is looking to artists to help to cope, to express the ideas they are struggling with. And therefore finding the ways in which you share is important. So a writer who then uses social media, which is beyond the page, to share their art, you're going beyond the page with that. And you can use it as a way to build your brand, but you can also use it as a way to get feedback on your work and to help people cope. And so I'm gonna circle back to why I mentioned Olive Senior. If you follow her on Twitter, she is really an avid tweeter. She has been doing a series of pandemic poems that, boy, it's just really great to see a writer taking our experiences and shaping them and spitting them back out. But again, a lot of times, if you were a writer who had a full-time job and you don't anymore, or you might find that you might think that this isn't a great time for you to write prose, it's also a good time for you to experiment with other forms. And that brings you to things like screenwriting. It's a great time to experiment with a short film. There are still opportunities for you to enter competitions, for you to hone your craft and that kind of thing. And what you can do is take a short story or even a novel that you had written before, and you can reshape it into a screenplay. Those two are completely different things, but it's a great time to learn. There is nothing like the internet to provide you with all the tools for learning. I mean, there's a reason that schools have to go online now, and a lot of people are being very generous with things that had paywalls. Now you can pay $1 and get access to them. And so it's a great time for you to learn new writing skills and for you to transition, or for you to take your ability to write great poetry and try to leverage that to somebody who does t-shirts and write that, or to write great songs. Of course, I mean, there is songs is really poetry to a more distinctive rhythm. It might also be a great time for you to record your own work and put it out there and test it and see how that works. Because if there's one thing we're realizing, is that a lot of things are shifting. Some of them are shifting into directions people were already heading. But a lot of it is also about finding new ways. And there is a way in which Instagram Live has never been as energetic as it is. Can somebody cue Bounty and Beanie Man? I mean, yeah. And poets can do this too. There are ways in which different writing communities are using that to share about their work. So this whole idea of going beyond the page is to say the most important thing is keep writing, but find different ways in which you can shape it and or share it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. And you are sort of wearing two hats this morning, because we also want to get into the subject matter of literary arts events. When people think about literary arts, they think black and white. But this is also a form of entertainment, would you say? And where is Jamaica when it comes to literary arts events, where someone like a Latoya Cross can enter a stage, read her poetry, and actually entertain an audience? Where are we, and where does the industry want to go when it comes to literary arts events, and how is COVID really affecting that right now?
Well, Jamaica could really seriously benefit from a stronger cadre of literary arts events. We've had some significant and important ones over the years, chief of which, of course, is Calabash. And I was like really feeling very nice and bossy to have invited to be on the Calabash planning team this year. And events like that have been critical for stimulating audiences and writers. The other important literary events have come up in its wake. Now, what literary events do is they tend to bring you together and bring you in a community, in a communal space. And most of them allow for sharing of experienced writers, but also giving new voices a chance to come up and be heard. And both those functions are critical for growth and for people to develop and for people to hear and understand and share new ideas. Now, what's happened is when we're now living in a world where a sneeze is a really dangerous thing, the last thing anybody wants to do is get under a tent with 3,000 other people, right? And so what COVID has meant is two things are happening. One, a lot of things have been postponed, but it's also meant that a lot of people have gone virtual, and the virtual writing community is, I'm very guarded about how I use language. I won't say it is booming, but it is certainly beating and things are happening. Last night, I was a part of a community of really just readers. It happened to have two publishers in the room, but we were there to share our love of books. It was the Bocas Festival people teamed up with Rebel Women's Lit to do a bring your own bottle and books party. I mean, people think writers are all, prudish.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll have a wine or rum and thing too. But it was kind of a book party where different people brought a book that they enjoyed, and we just sat in a virtual room, a Zoom room just like this one, talking about books that we love. And so you will find that people are experimenting this. You're having discussions on Instagram Live again. You're also having people tweeting about things. So there's a way in which the literary events community is finding its footing as well. One of the first things to happen when Jamaicans basically ran into the house and knocked the door, people immediately started to doing. I remember Fundaciones reached out to some of our authors and said, can your authors read a bedtime story to our children? Now, that's not something that would have happened under normal times. Mm-hmm. Under normal times, you would have gone into the school and done a reading. Now they had the kids, they dressed up in their pajamas, and we had Olive Senior in Canada reading to the children in Jamaica, from her book. Paula Ann Porter did the same thing. So people are reimagining the way literary events happen, but they are happening. And so it's like everything else. You're testing the ground and seeing what is solid and what is working and how you can pivot, and where you mightn't have to pivot, you just, go with whatever is flowing.
Thank you, Latoya. All right. Yeah, more Latoya. Anya, not Latoya. We have two Latoyas on our panel. Wow. Okay. Latoya, Tanya, Latoya. Wow. Nice. We're going to move to Latoya West-Blackwood. She's president of the Book Industry Association of Jamaica. Writing is really becoming a thing these days, isn't it? Everybody is writing and publishing, and self-publishing in particular is becoming quite prevalent. However, how does self-publishing stack up against having the right team, right in quotations? How does that stack up against having the right team, your editor and your publisher? How do you ensure you are on the right route to becoming that bestseller that you dream of becoming? Is it self-publishing or is it the right team? Latoya, West-Blackwood.
Good morning, everyone on the call, and good morning to the JBDC team. I had to change my background, which was much more filled with natural light and all the fanciness, but there seems to be a construction company booming close to my home. So, I've had to change my space. So I'm happy to share with you this morning. You'll probably find that my presentation doesn't necessarily zoom in on self-publishing at first, but if I can, I could go ahead and share my screen. This is a presentation that I actually had done before, and I kind of just will pull from some of the slides. I had to alter it a little bit. Let's skip over that. So some fast facts about my organization, which is Book Industry Association of Jamaica, the organization I currently have the privilege of leading. We are one of the oldest trade associations in the Caribbean at 30 plus years old. And we're currently one of the only members, and we hope that will change very soon in this region of the International Publishing Association. What does that mean? It simply means that we have, given Little Jamaica a voice at the table in terms of what's happening with international publishing, around topical issues like copyright and, just protecting the interests of creators, because that is a really big issue coming out of things like, technology and just general disruption, and even opportunities that are being created, but we have to manage how those opportunities manifest to ensure that it's a win-win all around. Our first chairman was Shirley Kirby. She's actually, most people would know, the founder of Carolong Publishers. And we are a proud member of Jam Copy, which actually started its roots in the BIAJ and has now gone on to become a very impactful organization representing the interests of a lot of creators, and they have become very innovative in terms of how they represent and who they represent, because I'm not sure if everybody on this call is aware, but they don't just protect the interests of people in the traditional way, let's say book authors, but even bloggers are now live events, which you touched earlier. We are also the hosts of the biennial festival, which, Kingston Book Festival is different from maybe some of the bigger festivals that have been around for a much longer time in terms of our focus. So we're very, very committed to engaging the Jamaican public, and we use Kingston as our anchor in terms of branding because capital of Jamaica, but it doesn't mean that our activities are just focused on the capital. We look at impacting all around. So even coming out of COVID, I think Tanya touched on that. We've had some very exciting opportunities. The physical festival is definitely off this year. As organizers, we made that decision very early out in terms of the shares of what would be required to even think about anything, regardless of whether the fact that it would be later in the year. We just made that decision. So we have, for example, been doing virtual book clubs. We did a pilot. We are doing a pilot with Fight for Peace, which covers the communities of Denhamtown, Trenchtown, and Parade Gardens, 60 book club members. And we have been engaging children and young people for the whole month of May, and we're going to go into June, sharing with them the gift of reading, connecting them with, personalities that might have not been accessible to them in terms of appearance. So we had Sidella Marley on Tuesday reading from her book, Get Up, Stand Up, which, was an amazing experience. She incorporated her family into the reading as well. And, so COVID hasn't been all bad. It's just highlighting some things and activities that we can tap into to lift spirits and, engage the whole matter of hope. So on the matter of publishing, you know, everything is, I start from a personal point and look outward with everything. And so, you know, as chairman of the BIAJ, first of all, I fell in love with books as a child, and our industry cannot exist without readers. So regardless of any other strategic plan, any other outlook, that's my reference point. You know, we have to create another generation of readers. And I like to reference Olive Lewin here. You know, I had this slide in my presentation, but I say, even though they asked me to talk about self-publishing, which I'm coming down to in a bit, I like to reference her just in terms of someone who in one respect was an academic and in another, you know, merged the two to become a storyteller and to really go deep in terms of our history and culture and to make that meaningful through storytelling. So at the base of our industry, for me, regardless of how the material is produced, it's all about stories. And as it says here, stories have power. And they really do. You know, you talk about word sound power. So writing, I think Suzette mentioned, you know, that everybody's kind of into writing now, but writing, I believe the word is the foundation. In the beginning, there was the word. And so our industry, if you're to look at it through the lens of synergies, the word is really the beginning of, you know, everything. And as I said, I just inserted Olive Lewin here because I think that she's a fabulous example, cultural example in terms of the power of stories and, you know, what the word means in terms of translating messaging and having impact. So locating our industry, as in the book industry, in the context of the creative industries, which we're a part of. Jamaica is a cultural superstate. My friend Kemal, you know, the one who introduced me to that term. And I really do believe in it. But one of the challenges that we have continued to, you know, face is that we know that we have the raw material in terms of the cultural goods, whether it's in people, whether it's in what those people create. But the struggle continues to be the whole matter of synergy. I heard something mentioned earlier about, you know, the facts around our potential and monetizing that, which is a term I know is very popular now. But I really believe that we need to move beyond saying what is obvious, which is that the world is influenced by our culture. We are powerful, we can produce, but how are we going to collaborate? It's a reality. You know, I owe it to myself as a creative to put forward the best and to create and to use my talents in whatever way. But we have to do some introspection now in terms of, you know, what do we owe to each other as a community, and going wider and wider and just bringing that all together in terms of making that value, making that count in a real way, not just the money, but balancing the money with the impact. All right, so after moving through all of that, let me just go straight to what you guys have asked me to focus on. So self-publishing, you know, back in the day, there's a term vanity publishing, which would have been with, and self-publishing hasn't necessarily had the most, it didn't start out with the most positive image in terms of how people regarded it. Certainly in our space and internationally, there was this perception, and not that it has disappeared, that self-publishing, maybe because of the quality of some of the works that would have come out of that genre, or, you know, the process that would have been employed to produce, which might not have paid attention to things like good editorial foundation, good design, and all of those things that traditional publishing would have the skill sets and the, you know, scope to really monitor and to manage. Then there was a stigma surrounding it. But we have seen where self-publishing, with, I guess, help from technology or advances in technology, has created a digital democracy. And what do I mean by that? So self-publishing, first of all, doesn't mean you do everything by yourself. It is still publishing, meaning it's still a process. And persons who opt to self-publish, I find are usually, well, they probably have one or two of these things. They are concerned about having or maintaining creative control over a process. And it also sometimes is a matter of access, because certainly in our market, which was traditionally dominated by textbook publishing, in order to really publish in other genres, even though we've produced some of the world's best writers, award-winning writers, you know, still have to come to the table with some kind of name recognition or celebrity or some kind of market guarantee in terms of that market, perceived market risk. What has happened, I find, with the opening up of online platforms or portals, is that more people are able to put their stories out, build community. So the barrier to entry has even become in terms of who can put out. Has that been all positive? No, but there are some interesting stories that have come out of it, such as 50 Shades of Grey, which I always reference because it's kind of mind-blowing. Now, if this book had gone into a typical publishing house, it might have never seen the light of day. But really what pushed this title was community. People wanted a particular type of content, and, you know, there is a whole build-up behind that in terms of demand and supply, and the whole matter of the writer becoming his or her own entrepreneur in the publication process. And even with self-publishing, you do have avenues to protect in your work in terms of copywriting, and I'll mention some of those further down. But, you know, self-publishing has really been redefined, and some of that stigma we find is being removed more and more as we're finding traditional publishers realizing this disruption or this, you know, movement, and seeing how they can re-examine their traditional models and meeting writers halfway. Which then takes me to, I'm gonna skip over that Amazon slide, Wattpad. Not sure how many of you have come across this platform, but Wattpad is, it's Toronto-based, two entrepreneurs there who have a history of tech innovation, but also love books, formed this company in 2006. And today it has over 80 million subscribers across 50 languages, and 77% of that is English language still, but the other languages represented, it's significant in terms of the number. What platforms like Wattpad have done, it's redefined authorship. So authors are no longer, you know, these, you know, we know the history in terms of who was an author when, especially in our context, and the journey to getting into that space and how inaccessible it was for some people. So it has redefined an authorship and who can become an author. Again, all of this has its good and bad. The most important thing, and you link it back to those numbers I mentioned just now, it's analytics-based publishing. A lot of self-publishing on Wattpad, which actually Wattpad has now converted to what you could think of as one of those big publishers, traditional publishers in some respect. You know, they use a lot of analytics because of that online community that they have. They are able to track in a real way what people are reading, where these people are, and lots of other data. And that for me in particular is very exciting because it opens up a whole other window when you talk about the monetizing part of things. So it's not just the love and the pleasure and the leisure from reading, but really being able to put the economics into it and to respond to demand based on data. Non-traditional models of funding. So Wattpad, for example, you know, has employed going after capital from venture capitalists. Other platforms that are not Wattpad, you have a lot of other communities. They actually employ crowdfunding to support their projects, and there are a lot of success stories there, maybe not in our region, and that's a whole other discussion in terms of attitudes towards crowdfunding. You know, am I gonna give her my money to go buy a Chris car? You know, this kind of attitude in terms of people raising money and accountability. But in other markets, it has worked out for persons who have pursued that avenue. Content on demand, some of these platforms you'll find as well, people are writing chapter by chapter. So, you know, an author doesn't have to start out investing in a project with, you know, by putting everything together. It's really a matter of creating, engaging, discovering, and coming up with a project that is actually, you know, involving their community, whether it's online or offline. And then you have the whole matter of marketing and publicity, which in the self-publishing space, you're finding a lot of creators really using social media to create community. And not going to go far off on this, but I was at Digital Book World Online recently, and they were focusing on artificial intelligence. I'm not sure how many of you realize that where publishing is concerned, or just a generation of content, AI is actually experimenting with that. There are stories, short stories that have been written by computers. There is actually a digital influencer, so not a human being, on Instagram that has over 2 million followers and is actually monetizing that presence, not a human being. So we're into a whole, you know, different space where that is concerned. To push through quickly, the future of publishing is about having connections to readers and of what those readers want. And I think that's what traditional publishing in our space has struggled with. Simply, I think it boils down to the matter of engaging in the regular way. So we go out and we have live events and it feels good. But how are we converting that feel good into actually knowing and being able to measure, you know, the impact and converting that into projects or products that people want, and they want it because you're able to measure it. There are some encouraging things in space. So Book Vision, which is a Jamaican owned and developed platform, is a very good example of innovation responding to what's happening in the space. So they service both the traditional markets in terms of, you know, regular publishing houses with their structure of editor, production, etc. They can create their storefronts and engage in terms of e-commerce on this platform, but it also serves people who have independently developed their projects and want to create their own storefronts to market and to sell their things. It has an interest because it has a social media connection. So people are able to review books, like it, share that. So I would encourage more Jamaicans to actually, you know, check out this platform. You can sign up as a reader and you can sign up as a publisher. And so far, the reports have been good in terms of the engagement, and just want to commend them as well in terms of their response to the COVID crisis, you know, servicing the educational sector and working with our Ministry of Education to get materials out to our schools. In the interest of time, I'm gonna skip over a lot of that. But people who are on the call, you know, writing and storytelling are not easy. I think a lot of people might approach writing and storytelling from us, and there's nothing wrong with you just, you know, thinking of things and reflecting on them and writing that down and documenting it. I'm not caught up with the whole award winning. It's nice to win awards, but I do believe that all of us have stories in us and all of those stories are important. But we should respect the craft, you know, in the same way that we respect the art of a dancer, the same way that you respect a surgeon who's gonna, you know, put a knife or whatever other equipment and skillfully perform a surgery on you. It's the same respect that we need to pay to writing and storytelling in the publishing process. So it takes time and effort, practice, and the courage to begin. I can't tell you how many people I've met who have wonderful stories, but kind of hold on to them because of the fear of what people are going to say and how it's going to be received. And that's why community is important. And I think we have a lot more work to do in our local space to build that out. So, you know, if you're putting together a book proposal, some of the key things, whether you are self-publishing or you're going to a traditional publisher, I find that a formal approach to reflecting on important things is important. So define the value that you're going to bring to the reader, define the value that you bring to the publisher, even if that publisher is you, and always do the math. You know, just make sure that it makes sense. And digital does not mean cheap. It just might mean that the barrier to entry in that space is a little bit lower in terms of some of the costs, but you always, I would recommend invest heavily or properly in editorial, good design, because even if it's print or digital, it still has to look attractive and it still has to translate into other markets outside of your family and friends. And I mean, there are some tips there about writing. Good writers read. So it all goes back to a good foundation with reading and reading habit. And I've shared here some logos from, you know, organizations that I would recommend in terms of writers' ability to learn, earn, and network. JAWS, which Tanya is the head of, and connected to that Lignum Vitae Writing Award, which is commendable in terms of recognizing and compensating writers for their work and intellectual property. Jam Copy, as I say, National Library of Jamaica, Code, which I'm not sure of the status of that program right now. And of course, I'm presenting from BIAJ, so you know, asking you to stay connected with us. Find out more about our programs and projects by following us online via Read Jamaican or Kingston Book Festival. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Latoya. Thank you. All right, we are going to move on now to the lone gentleman on our panel this morning, Kemal Brown, and he is the CEO of Digita Global Marketing. It was Bill Gates who once said, "Content is king." And Kemal is going to address us on that subject this morning.
Morning, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. Let me begin by thanking the JBDC for the opportunity to address everyone. And I'm going to keep my presentation short and sweet. I don't have many slides, unfortunately. But I wouldn't say unfortunate, because we are speaking about content, and at this moment, I'm giving you some video content. So I hope it's fruitful and everyone gets some value. I'll pick up right where Latoya left off. Let me also, you know, give my big ups to the two presenters who went previously. Great information, very insightful. And while I don't see myself as a writer, personally, I mean, clearly I write, you know, I've been published in the paper. I've actually written like 2 books, you know, but back when I was a research associate, your name don't really go on them, you know? But yeah, I run a company that really focuses on content development, online advertising, technology. And what I found is that digital, in many ways, doesn't really change the crux of what you're doing or the basics, but it really changes the format. And Latoya said a few moments ago that, you know, social media and the digital channels allow you to, 1, modernize your approach, and 2, reach more persons. But more so, I want to kind of focus on looking at the opportunities that exist in terms of building your brand and actually monetizing, you know, the content that you do create. As writers, clearly, you know, everybody wants to be New York Times bestseller, all of these things, or even the domestic, I'm not sure of the domestic awards that are associated with writing, but we all want some level of acclaim for our work, and of course the financial, you know, aspect to come alongside it. Realistically speaking, what we have to be cognizant of is that the world is opened up, all right? And COVID, in many ways, while it is, you know, posing a challenge to many businesses and our economy in general, it does and has created a lot of opportunities. And these opportunities that we have to look at are in the digital realm. Now, digital media is not just a marketing mechanism. It is not just something to kind of tell who you are, build your personal brand, tell your narratives, but it can be used for that. But realistically, if you have a product to sell, which it is, whether it is, skills, so a lot of writers, I think, are freelancers as well, right? You write across the spectrum, whether it be web copy, press releases, et cetera, not just full narrative, not just full books, but one second here. Yes, not just full books, but micro pieces of content, and these content forms are marketable, and they, you can actually pay for it. I mean, get paid for it. So there are lots of a plethora of online resources and tools that you can actually use. I mean, we everybody knows about like Fiverr and those types of things. I don't recommend leveraging Fiverr. I know a lot of writers earn on Fiverr, and because it's a global platform, a lot of persons use it. But I recommend kind of building a brand around yourself and letting the opportunities flow from that. And what I mean by that is we're all here creating content in varied forms, and that content must resonate with a certain target audience, right? So there's a young lady that started a blog called The World Up Closer. And it was essentially a travel blog. So she started a blog, she wanted to travel, she didn't have any money. And she said, I want to travel. So I'm going to create this consistent stream of content, go to these small resorts where I can review it. And hopefully I'll be able to, one, earn from this, and two, form some partnerships that help me to kind of do what I really want to do, which is earn to travel and go to these very exotic locations, not just, Portland. I love Portland. I was there last week, but just saying, she wanted to go global. And through creating her website, she created her blog. She started, pushing the content out little by little. She'd visit a place, do a write-up on it, et cetera, et cetera. And little by little, she garnered a large following, and pretty soon she was all over the world, benefiting from her craft, while at the same time, getting to live her dream. So we all have talent, skills, competencies, and these skills and competencies can be, translated digitally. And when they're translated digitally, it's really for the world to see. Early on when I started my company and my journey in digital marketing and digital technology, I blogged a lot, right? I wanted to be known as the go-to guy for all forms of digital marketing in the Jamaica and the Caribbean, and also globally. And so I blogged every week. I wrote some form of content. I did some micro form of content. I did a blog on LinkedIn. I did a blog on my personal website. And what I did was it helped my search engine optimization. Now, as writers, as anyone really, any profession, but writers in particular, you have the benefit of having the skills that really allow you to be found online. And one of which is search engine optimization. You know how to use keywords and write in such a way that you will show up in the search engines. And I did that for about like 3-4 months to 6 months, and eventually I started getting a lot of inquiries globally. So I've been to about 20 countries now on the basis of my website, my online brand. I mean, these persons have never seen me speak, but I got bookings all over the world, Dubai, all over the place, to go and present, Canada, Colombia, all over the world, on the basis of what I wrote, on the basis of how I presented myself online. And Latoya also spoke to the fact that quality matters a lot. And I can really say that quality matters a lot. Not just the quality of your writing, but just your overall presentation. Great writing in a horrible package is, it might be great, but you might not capture the eyes and the hearts of persons immediately. And if you have both, why not? If you can have both, why not? So a large part of what I advocate for in terms of the writing community, or anyone seeking to build a brand or really, profit from their acumen, is to really create a narrative around yourself where you see yourself as a thought leader in your space, and also the world sees you because you're publishing content consistently on this topic. Publishing doesn't mean you have to go through Latoya's traditional channels anymore. They're literally online sites where you can submit your book, and they literally, actually Amazon, you can submit ebooks, right? So you can do some basic design on Canva, great writing, download the book, upload the book, sell it for 99 cents, $10, depending on the value that you ascribe to it online, and you're published. A lot of persons have actually done this. And I will say that digitization has opened up the floodgates in terms of persons publishing. And that's a good and a bad, a positive and a negative. Positive because it has expanded the opportunity structure, so much more persons have access to getting their works published, their ideas out there, getting some regard and revenue from their work. But then on the next spectrum, you have persons that publish crap, right? So there's less what do you call it, boundaries and barriers. So that invites kind of like an abuse of an industry that, and I know Latoya is big on this. You know, she's the president of the Publishing Association. It's big on, you know, preserving the quality of our offerings, and I agree as well. But we have to, but it, as I said, it created opportunity for those that have, you know, anything to say. And in many ways, we're publishing daily on Twitter in terms of the ideas that we put out. And based on the things that we do publish, you know, we build a brand for ourselves. Some unassumingly, some assumingly, you know, some subvertly, some overtly. And it really presents that opportunity, as I said. If you have a book, if you have something you've done, put it online, put it on Amazon, create a mini website, put a few Facebook ads on it, get the book published online so that you can actually derive immediate value from it. And there are a host of strategies, a host of tactics, and a host of you know, websites that can help budding publishers or budding writers to really take their skills to the next level, not only in the context of writing itself, but how you present yourself to the world. And that's really what marketing is about, right? A brand is really what persons say about you when you're not in the room. And the benefit of our age is that we have the ability to narrate this brand and kind of determine what persons say about us based on what we put out and the content that we generate. And so I guess I will end by saying, you know, I just encourage everyone to really look at technology as, and I know there are purists among us, right? The people that love the hardcover and or soft cover, but you flip it through and it smells, you know, you smell a book. I know that whole thing. I am not one of those people. I have an iPad with like 300 books on it. I am not that guy, but I guess I admire the purist, but I also admire the utility that digital provides. Where I mean, we actually produced that ebook. Interestingly, the other day when COVID hit Jamaica and we realized, and the government issued the work from home order, Digita published a work from home guide. We took a week. I mean, it's beautifully designed and illustrated, if I do say so myself. We took a week, we wrote all the content. I assigned each of my team members, like, you know, one of the pages, and one of the chapters, and we just knocked it out. And we were able to get that out. We were published in the paper because of it, one of the first early actors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And from that, we've been publishing a lot of content. I have an ebook as well available online. Did it up, got it designed, put it up for free, and it's helped to convert and, you know, kind of, it's played a role in my content mix. And the content mix is essentially, you know, the diversity of content you put out. So as a writer, you might want to be on Twitter, sharing some of your quotes. I know Latoya earlier was saying her poem, she could probably publish one a day or a paragraph of each and say, hey, for the rest of this, link to my website. And on the website, she has her book that she has for $9.99 online. And you have e-commerce set up, which has been opened up via NCB new portal, because e-commerce was always a challenge in Jamaica, but NCB has kind of freed up their platform and said you can just set up your online store and sell your book to anyone in the world. And that's the benefit. So your content will resonate with persons. And clearly, if you have a wider market, if you're trying to sell to 2.6 million Jamaicans, and realistically, that is about 400,000. If you look at persons that are earning and able to actually purchase things, why not expand that using online, using the online infrastructure to millions upon millions of people? And if it is that you even sell your book for $1 to a million people, you know, a US millionaire, and you spend say 40 cents to advertise somewhere, I mean, the possibilities are really endless, and it's really up to each of us to tap into digital technology, run some social media ads, put the investment. You know, we invest a lot of time and energy into writing, but you won't invest 50 US, 100 US into promoting your work. That makes no sense to me. Because if this is your passion, if this is something you believe in, if you believe in yourself, why wouldn't you? Someone said online books are great until eye strain. Well, they have some blue light glasses that you can buy. It's like $15 on Amazon, and it helps you to kind of, you know, read all night on the iPad books or whatever. So yeah, I mean, I'm an advocate of investing in yourself. I mean, I put up my website, I ran ads, I would write micro content, I would create my own quotes and put up images with myself on it. So there's a lot of things you can do to kind of build your brand and separate yourself from the rest of the flock. And depending on, you know, the type of writer that you are, if you're doing like children's books, if you're doing, it's a whole host of content. You know, you could have a child reading the book and giving you a review, and you could do a small video of that with your smartphone, put it online. If you are into, like, you know, anthropology or whatever it is, you can create a video where you have, some of your subjects speaking on realities. So you can't just lock yourself into the print. And I loved what Tanya was saying about, off the page, right? Off the page. Well, the reality is our world is literally off the page. And persons, as a writer, you might want to actually do a reading of your book, like you do in bookstores, but digitally, using video, or you could record it. There's just a plethora of ways that you have to kind of approach things differently, if it is that you want the recognition. Because realistically, to be frank, people aren't reading as much as they used to, right? And this is something that the newspapers are contending with. And this is something that Jamaica in general is contending with. Lower reading rates across the spectrum. Persons aren't reading because of the flurry of content coming at them. So how do you get persons interested in something that they're not necessarily interested in? By creating some dynamic content that kind of pulls their intrigue into what you have to say. And while it is that, a lot of us are purists, I love books, I read a lot, as I said, digitally, you have to also be cognizant of that times are changing and you have to adapt or die. And while there will always be utility in the written form on page, you have to find ways to get your written form off page, so that it's connecting more with audiences sometimes, to create a more dynamic experience, user experience, for those even reading your book. So I think, I think that's pretty much my remarks. And I look forward to your questions and hope, some value was derived from my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Kemal. Definitely value as always. Always a joy having you on board with us. Adapt or die. We'll come back to that a little bit. But I am going to go back to Latoya Cross, our in-house talent at JBDC. My team members know that I love to highlight JBDC talent. I boast about them a lot, and I am just really happy to have Latoya Cross, who I met late last year at a work event and read the very poem she read at the start of this session. When she started it, I was like, yes, she chose my favorite. I owe it to myself. Latoya, you brought us spoken word entertainment this morning, but as Latoya West-Blackwood wrote in one of her slides, stories have power. They delight, enchant, touch, teach, recall, inspire, motivate, challenge. I think I owe it to myself did all of that on that page. What was the inspiration behind that particular piece? Tell us about it.
All right. The whole book in itself was a way of expressing, you're going through a lot of emotions. You don't know who to tell it to or who may listen or what exactly it is that you want to say. Mm-hmm. But then I find that when you write, you get it all out. And in the same process of you getting it out, you're actually helping somebody else with something that they may not know how to express. So when I wrote, I owe it to myself, it was at a point where you want to know what it is. Why are you here? What contributions do you have to make? What do you owe to yourself, so to speak? Yes, you are here, you were born, but why? What do you owe? What does Latoya owe Latoya, as an individual? And that was when that poem came. So I owe it to myself to speak my truth. I don't have to subscribe to what you say, and that is your truth. I have my own truth to live. I owe it to myself to make a contribution, not just to exist, not just to be here, but to live life, not just to, be on earth and passing through with nothing at all to leave behind, or for nobody to say, hey, I remember Latoya because she did this or because she did that. So, it was truth seeking for me, and that was the result of it all.
This is your first publication. It's your first publication?
Yes, it is.
When did you discover your love for writing, or that you could write? Did you discover it yourself, or someone told you?
I'm a reader, and I've always been reading. I love books. And then a friend of mine said to me, will you always be reading and not contributing? And I'm like, well, I can always read, man, but fine. And then I was challenged to write something. The same person said, all right, I want for you to write something. Let me read it and to see, you know, if you're just supposed to be reading or you're supposed to be writing. And then after that, the person said, you know, you have a talent, and if you don't use it, I remember the exact words, if you don't use it, God is gonna take it back. And at the time, I'm like, what are you talking about? But then now I find that when I can't say something out aloud, or I can't explain it, if I put it on paper, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So that was when I realized that I had to take it seriously. Like I used to write a little bit here and there, a little poem, just for fun, nothing serious, just for fun. And then now the more I keep writing, I'm like, but you're wasting this. This is not fun. This is not supposed to be just for fun. You're supposed to be doing something with it. So it was in June of last year when I took maybe a month to finish the book, just to show you that I've always been writing and never really paying any attention to it, but the poems kept coming and I kept denying them, and they keep coming and I didn't know what else to do. So I said, all right, let me just write this book.
Let's get into the monetization of this, Latoya. You have been you published last year. How have you been promoting this book? First of all, I'd like you to show us the cover. Just hold it up a little bit so our audience can see what it looks like.
It's a lovely little green book.
Pieces of me. Great. All right. What have you been doing to promote that? Kemal spoke about a few things earlier. What have you been doing?
All right. At the initial stage, you know, I had an Instagram ad going. I market on Facebook. I'm in a local bookstore here in Maypen, and most times I do reading, but because I'm centered here in Clarendon, it's Clarendon based. So I'll have, you know, you'll have an organization posting something and they'll call on me to say, hey, come and read. I have persons sending me their videos and for me to post it of persons who are enjoying the book. And I also do my own video of me reading, and that is on my Instagram page and on my Facebook page. So that is how I market.
Do you have a favorite poem by another author?
I enjoy poetry from other persons, yes, but I think Maya Angelou's Phenomenal Woman, that's my absolute favorite. That's my absolute favorite.
All right, Latoya, thank you. We'll be back with you shortly. So we're going to have a little chat with our panelists in general. I know Latoya, I'm gonna give Latoya West-Blackwood an opportunity to respond to something that Kemal said earlier, and I see the chat room blowing up, but I want them to blow it up right here so we can all hear. Latoya West-Blackwood is burning to answer Kemal on something. Latoya, go ahead.
All right, so I appreciate Kemal's presentation. He had some really good insights, and as somebody who is doing a lot in the digital marketing space, then, you know, I can appreciate some of the things that he would have mentioned, but I have to correct some inaccuracies. Well, I would call them inaccuracies from an industry standpoint. So the first thing I would say is that, you know, I'm very guarded in terms of generalized statements that kind of apply, you know, a fact with a broad brush. So it would be useful for our audience in terms of Kemal sharing with us the source for and the data in terms of that people are reading less. What I would say is that people are consuming content differently. Publishing boils down to content, whether it is a book, a magazine, there's music publishing, there's newspaper publishing. And I think in our space, we tend to, when we hear the word publishing, we tend to put everything into one space. And because book publishing is the most popular, then, you know, when people hear publishing, they automatically think about the book as they know it. So I'm very careful about those things, and I go into, in terms of our local situation, which is my reference point, we have actual engagement with schools and communities. And what we're finding is that young people are saying that some of the locally produced materials, the feedback they will give is the packaging, which Kemal touched on. They would talk about the fact that this era, in terms of the digital natives, that's what we'll call the young people who maybe are from the 2000s or late 90s coming down, they are not necessarily so enamored with Anansi stories, right? They are looking to the global space and they want to just identify with stories that make them laugh, for example. There doesn't have to be this big moral lesson or takeaway. So they want humor, they want, you know, things that excite them, that spark the imagination. And so that's why it's very important with the work of organizations like the Birth Awards, where they are encouraging, you know, our writers to create new materials for young adults, which are gonna, those are the people who are gonna turn into the adult market, right? So I know
what kind of new material is that? Define new material for young adults. What might that look like?
Yeah, new material for young adults is literally that, new books. So there are a series of publications that have come out of the Birth Awards program, which you can actually find online in terms of the authors and the titles. So it's all well documented. And when they come out annually or biannually, we get copies of those books. So it's well cataloged online if you look up that program. And as I say, you know, I don't tend to we will hear statements, for example, when we're going to schools, there will be teachers who say, oh, don't bother even with them boys because they're not reading. But when you engage those boys, they are interested in graphic novels or they are interested in comics because that's what they like. You can't force people to consume what they don't like, right? And I know another point I'll say is that we focus on technology not as purists and seeing it as something that it's a print book versus ebook, but the Book Industry Association, for example, is concerned about access. So we don't look at the whole matter of technology from a vanity standpoint or how it allows, social media allows it to market itself more or put a picture up. It's about access. So we think about things like audiobooks, which serve a particular community. Some of us like audiobooks, but for people who are blind, it is an access. It's a way to access the material. It's not just about a preference for that platform, right? And so we think about technology in that way as complementary, not something that is here to replace or threaten in terms of a doom and gloom outlook. It is about incorporating and innovating using technology. And we have demonstrated that, as I said to you, we spoke about the Fight for Peace project, which we have piloted a virtual book club. Tomorrow, we're going to be closing out that book club, working with Listen Me, which is Kenya Mattis and her team. And they have the Greater Cakes project, which is a digital writing workshop for children. So they are able to write stories, regular, just them pen and paper or type it. And when they write those stories, they learn how to develop a character. And what the Listen Me team is going to do is to animate that character for them. So now you have a child not only being able to dream up a story, but to have it come to life and to understand that, animation is probably a career path I could, you know, take up. I can make my stories come to life, or I can use that skill in other ways. I can use it for a movie, you know, because all movies, for example, have a script. That's a way of writing. So not all writing ends up in a book as we know it. And so we have to open our minds and think about the synergies. And, you know, for us, as I said, we think about impact always and the tools that can help us. Somebody asked about copyright. I'm going to wrap up and allow the other panelists. But somebody asked about copyright, and Kemal mentioned Amazon and some other online platforms. So yes, they do exist, but I will share two lessons or two bits of caution. So there's one individual I know who went on a site that offers this kind of bundle deal if you want to publish a book. And actually what the site did, the person didn't read all those, that fine print about terms and conditions that you normally just click accept, but you don't really read it thoroughly. A lot of us are guilty of that. Well, that person didn't read all the details. And what happened is that, sorry, my thing is getting low. What happened is that that person had to end up not really taking the provider to court as formal, but writing a warning letter because they pretty much made other copies of the person's publication and had them for sale without her knowledge. But based on the terms and conditions that she would have accepted, she allowed that service provider to retain copies of, a digital copy of her work. And there were some other loopholes there that allowed the person to reproduce without her permission. So that's a very real situation. And then I would say that there are some individuals who are very talented in terms of technology. And we have had a case where a big international publisher has written to book industry to alert us that there were some educational materials that were pulled from their database and essentially were being made available at little or no cost to people who were sitting a particular exam, right? Breaching clearly copyright and a whole other lot of things. So technology is good and it has its limitations for even big companies, much less people who are operating at a very smaller level. So it's very good to educate yourself. As I said, Jam Copy is a very good resource. Their website has a lot of information about how you can protect yourself as a creator. And if you need more detailed information, then you can always set up a consultation and reach out. But those are just some comments. I could say a lot more, but I'll allow the other panelists to respond.
Okay, Latoya, thank you. I see Kemal responding in the chat with some links to articles defending his point that people are reading less. I see Tanya's mic is on. You want to say something?
I really want to say something. One, I want to elaborate on some of and endorse some of what Latoya is saying. I think it is critical. While some people do style themselves as purists, even when you're not thinking of it as an accessibility point, there's a way in which many readers enjoy multiple things. So I love a physical book. I also have Kindle. There's a facility to it. And there is also great interest in audiobooks. And one of the areas that is definitely growing in publishing is audiobooks. And it's one of the areas where we in the Caribbean really need to exploit more. And I know as a publisher, it is an area I'm certainly thinking of. And that then brings tie-in to other sectors, because I know one of the conversations I've seen online is people talking about how is it possible to get more Jamaican voices to voice audiobooks by Jamaican writers. So that's a whole other kettle of chicken. One of the things I wanted to do though was to point out some of the books that are coming out of the BERT Award. And bringing this close, because one of the things is...
Sorry, Tanya, which award is that?
The BERT Award that Latoya.
Okay.
It is currently kind of in a sleep because they've run out of funding. But what it did was it brought a striking number of fantasy, fiction. This story is romance and politics set in Trinidad. This story loops in what you would call a kind of Caribbean folk tale in a contemporary setting, because it's a girl who likes to play cricket and all of that stuff. I mean, you know, this one talks about the power of art and imagination in telling stories in history, because it's about a young girl who she's an artist and the spirit of the enslaved comes through her and she ends up drawing their stories. And all of these stories came through the BERT Award. And so what it's done is that it's made a lot more stories more vibrant. And not to join the Pick on Kemal team, But one of the things that
right, you all take time with the gentleman in the house, please.
Right, can manage it. One of the things is that it is probably true that there is less reading happening, but one of the things I always caution, and I'm going to bring it back home, is one of the greatest lies we have been telling ourselves for ages is that Jamaicans don't read. The truth of it is that we often have not provided enough content for Jamaicans to read, right? And that is something we really need to look at. And as Latoya was saying, we also look at the nature of the content and how engaging it is and how much work we've actually done in engaging these people. And this is why I'm not really on the Pick on Kemal team, because what he's talking about in terms of marketing of your work is critical.
Very important.
Yes. So I'll go back to, for want of a better, because I can't remember her last name, I'm going to call her Latoya the poet.
Cross.
Cross, right. And so I'm listening to her poem, and it's inspiration. It's inspirational. Nothing sells on Instagram like inspiration. A whole heap of people who having issues with them life and want somebody to tell you you are valuable and you are worthwhile. And so Instagram, and not just Instagram ads, but how she can convert her poems into stories and into posts, and all of that is a great way for her to promote it and to get people engaged. And one of the things with, because regardless of who you are, poetry does not sell very well. Poets sell poetry. People buy poets they connect with, and then doing spoken word, doing readings, or if you can't read, understand yourself, know your strong points. If you can't read the poem, it don't mean the poem bad. Get somebody who can read. This is a great time for audience generated content. Have, this is building on what Kemal was saying. How do you get other people to read your stuff and show it and share it? And then from that, you can leverage, even if you don't make money on this book, you might make money on the next, or you might find other ways to do it, because it is also important for us to remember that books fuel other kinds of stories. There are adaptations. You can have a great book, and the book, it mightn't have been able to buy you a house, but if it gets adapted into a movie, you may get enough money for that mortgage. And therefore, there are ways in which you can think about it. There are ways in which you can think about how do you make it popular, so in this market, so you can sell it in another market. If I could find
and
it.
translations are a
exactly.
big
So I'm talking about. There is this Alicia McKenzie. She is a Jamaican living in France, and last year I think it was, she, with a Chinese publisher, published a collection. I'm looking around because I'm trying to see where it is, and I cannot find it. I think I may have stuck it behind the iPad. And they published, oh, here it is. They published this collection of Jamaican stories in Chinese. I was so excited to get it, but I couldn't even tell who was in it because everything is in Chinese, including the names of the people. So here I was as a Jamaican, quite excited. And it wasn't until the good thing is they finally had some of the pictures, and you don't need to translate the pictures. And this is a picture of Sharon Beach. And, you know, so this is, and these stories have never been published in English, right? This collection was first published in Chinese, available in China, all Jamaican writers, right? And so there are possibilities, and a lot of that. And to go back to what Kemal was saying, this generation has the greatest opportunity to build your brand. But even as you build your brand, it is also important for you to make use of the tools that have built and supported the publishing industry. There's a reason that vanity publishing was looked down on, because editors are critical. Editors is how is using an editor is how you avoid going out in public and not wearing any clothes. Your editor
just turned off when I read ebooks that haven't been edited.
Exactly. I have seen, and
I just done with it right away.
Exactly. And those two examples that Latoya is pointing out to you, those are two very specific things, but they're not all it is. While the self-publishing space is way more democratic, it is also way more dangerous, because a lot of these sites have no reputation on the line, right? Where a publishing house has a reputation on the line, and they will take your money and they will put things in the fine print, and they will say, oh yes, you don't have to pay us, but you should give us $3,000 in marketing money. And you will get back that $3,000 in marketing money as soon as you sell 2,000 copies of the book. But please note that the books that you sell yourself do not count to that $2,000 sale. And what it means, you have basically paid for the publication of the book and you are not able to earn from it. So that point about being very careful, there are a myriad of opportunities, right? But when you engage in them, be very careful about how you go about it. And that question of having a team, and that team cannot just be your best friend unless your best friend is an editor and she's not afraid to tell you that the story not work. So be willing to find people who can give you great feedback and come back again. Sometimes that's also where social media can work, because you can put something out there, and Wattpad isn't quite social media, but it is engagement for writers. A lot of people find their writing community there. So you're writing something, you can test it on Wattpad, look on the feedback that it gets, and you can put it forward. You know, I mean, so we need to not see print versus technology. They complement each other, they work with each other. And as a writer in today's world, you have a host of tools that you can put to your advantage, but it is critical, and I cannot stress this enough, that you recognize that you are the greatest of those tools, and how you build your craft and how you build your skill and how you engage is key to your getting up there. I think I'm going to step down from the soapbox now.
I see Kemal is back, and I have a feeling he has something else to say.
I mean, realistically speaking, you know, I don't make generalized comments either. My comments were factual. It is a fact that persons are reading less than they once were. And I mean, if you look at when I mean reading, I mean holding a book in front of your face or reading something that will require depth and critical thinking. I'm not speaking about reading Instagram posts or just reading, you know, simple things. I'm speaking about narratives and, you know, just generally, people don't even read the newspaper as much as we once did. The Gleaner saw this and they tried to go e-paper to try and modernize. So the mediums have changed. That is a valid point. You know, the form of the content has changed, but there's a reason why audiobooks are so prevalent, because persons aren't finding the time to read anymore. So they listen using other skills. Or you might find someone, instead of when persons publish an article, they actually do a video tied to the article, because they realize persons are going to watch the video and not read. So this is a fact. It's not generalized. And you know, to tell yourself otherwise is setting yourself up for problems. To tell yourself otherwise, persons are reading less than they once did. And two articles I shared, you know, verified that. Pew Research Center is a very well-known research entity, and they verify the same. This is not a doom and gloom story, though. What it is, if you don't understand what's happening, you can't adjust, right? If you don't understand what's happening, you can't adjust. So if you understand that persons are reading print less, you might want to do your book in an audiobook version too, all right? So that you enhance the ability of persons to consume the content in a different manner. Or you might want to do some short video snippets of your poems and point to the poems, you know, that you can read them. You read your poems yourself, or you get a popular reader to read your poems in an audiobook form. So you have to adapt. If you put right now, and I can tell you, because I publish in the Gleaner, I write in the Gleaner quite a bit, and I get published. And the most feedback that we get is from my email when we send when we break the content down. So for example, I have some statistics in an article, and we put the statistic in an image form and make a nice infographic and send that out via blast. That is way better reception in terms of persons, one, understanding the content, and two, engaging with it. So I would just say, you know, we have to be cognizant of that. The points that Tanya made were very, very important. Now, clearly, I am not a legal officer. I don't assume, I assume we all are here do our due diligence, right? In any type of business activity, you have to do due diligence. So while there are opportunities, there are potential pitfalls. And those examples that Latoya shared as well show that, you know, you have to be careful. As in anything, snake oil salesmen are as old as time, right? From when the snake was selling Eve the idea of biting the apple. They've always been if you believe in that narrative. There's always been persons selling things that are real, but you have to then do your due diligence. And clearly, if you are an author, if you are a writer and you believe in your craft, you're gonna go to the JIPO and do your respective copywriting. You're gonna do the things that are necessary, and persons like Latoya are there to guide you, who has the industry expertise. And I would say one thing we have to be cognizant of, even in the context of reading less and speaking to also what was said about fake sources and fake businesses, and somebody giving you some terms that are really unfavorable. It's the diversity I spoke about earlier, that the internet has opened up a diversity, a plethora of opportunities, and a plethora of vendors, plethora of authors. You are in competition. This is something that a lot of persons, you might feel like you're the best ever. Not everybody feels like that, sorry to say. And the reality is, no, realistically, I'm a pragmatist, right? I see faces like, ooh, but the reality is not everybody feels that. You know what tells that? The results. And the results, as Tanya said, is how you brand yourself as an individual. There's a strategy towards being received well. Because we've all seen somebody write crap and it kind of like, how did this person get so big and their writing is like subpar, right? And even critics are like, man, but this thing is, because it's not that. People buy from people that they like because they trust them. Likability is key to trust. It's key to believability. And therefore, if you get somebody to like you, they will do business with you, all right? So there's a lot of factors, psychological and physical, in the context of selling anything, and in the context of, just putting out anything. And one of the things that I personally believe in is adapting to the market, not asking the market to adapt to you. So I've done a lot of consulting for startups and companies, to help them kind of win. And one of the first places we begin at, and the thing is, it's tied to, all right, so there are two things. They're passion projects. If you're just a passionate writer and you don't care if you sell or make any money, you just want to create your art, that is a different, I'm not talking to you, right? I'm not talking to you at all. Because you're more of a using that for your soul versus, for some coins, right? I'm a businessman. I'm an entrepreneur. Everything I do is tied to adding value and paying and being compensated for the value that I add. And so I begin from a perspective of, what does the market want? Now, sometimes you might not know what the market wants, right? And you buck up on things. But sometimes you do know what the market wants because of the amount of data out there and the research. And so if you see that literally if you want to be successful, and I'm defining success here as selling a lot of your copies of your book, audiobook, whatever it is, that's how I'm defining it. You would look at the industry that has the top sales. So for example, children's book, that's a very popular niche. Children's books about like ABCs, very popular niche. You don't have to be the most diverse and the most original. Realistically speaking, Jamaica is a brand that is powerful. We have a brand at the back of being a Jamaican author that you literally are received well in the context of just the mystique around our country, the mystique around who we are, our language, etc., etc. But you also have to think about what does the market want before you comment. That's my approach, right? Clearly, you might want to write a short story about whatever, I don't know. But will the market resonate with that? Do people actually like those stories? Do persons like people that write about cats and not about dogs? What does the data point to? Because the data will give you insights that will help you be more successful. It's the same thing for social media. Somebody says, based on the data that we've crunched, the best time to post for engagement or to reach this particular audience is 1 p.m. Why would you go and post at 2 p.m. just because you feel special? It makes no sense. The data is pointing you to success metrics and you're choosing to ignore them because of what you believe. Belief kills, yeah? And belief cures. And so as a business person, you can't get caught up in, and I see somebody said they're doing stuff on Fiverr, great, right? It's all tied to the level of success that you want. It's all tied to, because clearly Fiverr is taking their cut out of your stuff, but they have a big audience, so you can reach more people. So it's all tied to your goals, what you're trying to achieve. And you have to do that within the context of the reality that we exist in. And this reality is a generation of persons that are not reading as much as they used, a generation of persons that are Netflix and chilling more than anything else. And I'm speaking about clearly a certain demographic here, right? Primarily millennials. And you have to look at that and say, well, wow, if this is the new normal, and clearly I read a lot. I'm a CEO, I have to, it's like requirement. But I find myself nowadays really listening to audiobooks more. Or I find myself watching videos on YouTube more, or listening to the video of the audiobook on YouTube. So just be cognizant of the new normal and the realities that are taking place. Don't be stubborn. Adapt.
Stubborn.
No. I'm being
What
real.
is,
I'm being
what
real.
is coming out of this debate for me is, and it comes out every week that we do this forum, it just keeps coming together. Those of us who participate in all of them, we hear some of the same things under different subject headers. And so what I'm hearing from this is it's the need for collaboration. It's the need for collaboration, a convergence between the two, right? Because some of you are actually saying the same things. Tanya mentioned that the biggest lie is that Jamaicans don't read. And it's because we are not producing what they want to read. Kemal says, give the market what it wants. Kemal says, people are reading less. Latoya, West-Blackwood says, people are consuming content differently. So if you see where I'm going with this, you realize that it's not so much of a difference and a debate. It's actually the need to converge and collaborate and support each other. Tanya, I want to come back to you on that point you made about the Jamaican audience and how we consume literature. And if you could elaborate on that a little bit for me, especially as it relates to storytelling, the role it plays in Jamaican culture. We just had Beenie Man and Bounty Killer shell down the internet on Saturday with music. Another part of telling our story, telling the Jamaican story, the powerful brand Jamaica that we have here. But long before Beanie and Bounty, there was Miss Lou telling the Jamaican story in print and spoken word and so on, and so many other authors that we could mention. What role has the writer, does the writer have to play in the preservation and promotion of this strong culture that Jamaica has?
Well, I think the thing is, the writer, the storyteller, I don't necessarily use a strong permanent marker to separate those two, because they're not, as you are indicating in your preference, they're not necessarily two different things, because at their heart, Beenie Man and Bounty Killer are great storytellers, and that's why this thing continued. They use great use of language, and they were influenced by the likes of Miss Lou as well. So there's a trajectory, and there is reframing, and there is even something like one of the things that is being noted, and that's happening now, is how do you tell the same thing differently? It's one of the lessons about that I was reading when I was reading about writing a screenplay is, tell me the same thing but different. Is one of the ways in which people rewrite. So for example, if you're writing an Anansi story today, do you start it with once upon a time again? Is it told in the same way? No. If you want to connect with current audiences, no, it's not told that way. There are still ways in which people want to consume the traditional, but one of the great ways is to refresh it, to tell it differently. And so you find one of the stories, again, that came out of the Burt Award was, and this young man is from Guyana, and his story is essentially an Anansi story. It's essentially an Anansi story, but it's very different. It's written as fantasy, where the spider creatures come from an adjoining world, but it's using a lot of the principles built in traditional storytelling. And therefore, one of the ways, and this isn't quite the question you asked, but I think it's great for writers to look for influence, is to look at the folklore, because it's a part of the distinctive and defining thing, and it's a part of what people look to for us, and it's a part of who we are and how we are, and that sitting where you can't quite explain what Jamaicans have, and it's in the walk, and it's in the talk, and in all of that, and you can't quite put your finger upon it, but I eat that. That is our history, our culture, our food, and a lot of that is in our stories. And then when we look also at children and reading and how they read and what they read, it's critical to shaping who they are. And if you take an old-time story and you rewrite it and re-referencing it so they can understand today, that is important. A child today, a digital native of today, doesn't see and feel the world in the same way that I did, and I don't afraid to tell nobody, say I owl, right? Today's child does not see the world in the same way, right? There was this thing a few years ago that says, that said to a 1-year-old, a magazine is an iPad. That doesn't work. There is a way in which that is a truth, but it doesn't mean the child cannot connect with a magazine, and it doesn't mean that there isn't a way to reshape and reframe the information and use our old stories, use our Anansi stories, use all of those to refresh and to reimagine, to come back to Beenie Man. One of the things I think Beenie Man will get props for is how he has been key to putting in bits of Jamaican history. There are a generation of people who their only understanding of 51 Storm is that it is in a Beenie Man song. They don't know what Hurricane Charlie is, right? And because he used it in a fresh and innovative way, right? And that is a key part of us retaining who we are and repackaging it and rebranding it. And I mean, and that's what creativity is about. Creativity is taking the world that we have, ingesting it, turning it around, understanding it, and putting it back out in a fresh and interesting way. And we as Jamaicans do that very well because we have a very unique way of seeing the world. And in many ways, the world is interested in how we see and how we mean.
Thank you, Latoya.
You keep calling you Latoya.
I don't know. You just work with it. I don't know.
I would
just call everybody Latoya.
Sorry, Tanya. At that point that Tanya made, it's very true. The thought just came to me. I forgot that we actually have done like 2 digital campaigns where we wrote a book, essentially, right? One was called Aria's Story, and it was essentially a storybook that we created about child abuse, right? And we found that because of how we presented the content, we illustrated each panel and we wrote a little story underneath it. It really, really had a lot of take up. So it's really about, how you blend, as we've been saying, how do you blend both the traditional and the digital to ensure that, persons are actually actively engaged. And what we did is we also used fear of missing out, right? So we released 3 parts of the story every day, 1 at 9, 1 at 12, 1 at 3, on the dot every single day. And we got it was a project that we did with the Canadian High Commission. And we got tremendous uptake, and the Office of the Children's Advocate. We got tremendous uptake in just the commentary. Persons were engaging, persons were clamoring for more, saying they can't wait till 3 o'clock, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's really about finding that sweet spot, what the audience wants, the content and the manner in which you convey it. And as you say, using that Jamaican creativity.
Thank you, Kemal.
If I could, can you see my screen? Can you see this?
A little bit.
Okay. The camera's over here.
It's hard. Go back. Okay. Pull it back a little.
Back. Oh, then again.
Oh, we can't see it.
Okay, can't see it. What I was trying to show, there is this one of.
That's from LinkedIn.
No, that's from Instagram. Richard Natu, who goes on Instagram by DJ Sinister. He's a great artist and he does beautiful ink work. And he's been working on a story, I think, for children. And he's been posting for the last however many days, little bits of story. And it's been getting incredible likes and uptake. And my understanding is he does intend to go the traditional publishing route, but this is a way to work out the story. And so that's a way for you to do it. And I think one of the key things that Kemal was talking about is know what kind of writer you are. Because depending on who you are and what you do, your goals are completely different. And you can have personal writing goals and still eating is real. So you write your poetry or your prose for your soul, but it doesn't mean you can't tap somebody else, a mogul in business, and say, I'm good with the word, let me help you write your bio. And that will pay you, you know. It won't feed your soul, but it will pay you. And sometimes putting dumpling in your belly helps you to be able to continue another day to feed your soul. And so you have to do that balancing act.
Thank you, Tanya. All right, Latoya,
Yeah.
I know that in our preliminary discussions about you coming on this forum, you wanted to address something in particular, and I want to give you an opportunity to talk about that a little bit, as well as our other panelists, of course. We're going to go to the chat room shortly as well for a couple of questions that are.
Yeah, we should.
Right. So right after this, we go to the questions. But amidst COVID-19, one would think that a writer is in a cubbyhole somewhere with a notepad and a computer or something writing. And how does it affect a writer? Does COVID-19 affect the population of writers? And what do writers need to be doing at this point in terms of innovation and adaptation during this particular pandemic?
All right, so what I'll do is try to frame my answer in both the discussion that happened just now and the general reality as we're exposed to it globally. So first of all, writers are people. So they experience the pandemic from the point of view of being an individual, being somebody's friend, being somebody's family member. People have lost close friends and relatives, maybe more so outside of our space, where there has been a higher death toll, and emotionally as well. Some of the physical kind of public health guidance have limited people's movement. There are a lot of writers or creators who are inspired by the environment or being with people or not being with people, but still being able to move about freely. And those are some new realities that we've all had to process. Personally, I try to balance the discussion about productivity at a time like this because I am big on mental health. And I do think while some of us will come out and say, yeah, it's a time to make money, it's a time to this and that, I would really say if that's your personal goal or focus or drive at this point in time, go for it. But I don't think people should feel under any significant pressure to be the most productive at this time. It might for some be a time of introspection, a time to document their thoughts and feelings in whatever way. So I would just kind of put that out there firstly. I think that COVID generally, it has pushed us, most of us outside of our comfort zone. A lot of the interactions and a lot of the tools and the ways that we have had to go about sharing, participating, collaborating. It's not that these tools were not available before or that these means were, inaccessible to us, but we perhaps were just not motivated enough or even thinking about it or not aware in some cases. Because we do have to realize that there's a big digital divide that exists, not only in terms of the age demographic, but in terms of the very real matter of access. I live in Kingston proper, and there are days I've not been able to really properly access the internet, though it's this great tool that helps me to do my work and to collaborate with others. So that's a very real reality for some of us. But I would say that on the point of innovation, I think that now is definitely a moment for us to really, some of us have had to slow down, whether by choice or by force, based on what's happening in our businesses or industry. And I think that it is an opportunity for us to re-examine how we have been doing things, why we have been doing them, and who we have been doing them with. one of the big takeaways for me is I see a lot more people in my industry and the creative space collaborating more. That's been an observation for me at this point in time. There has been a lot of rollout. Significant to me on my radar would be, for example, initiatives like Kingston Creative. They have had their digital commissioning artists, writers to create works and to share them using technology. There has been training. I know that they partnered with Sagicor, for example, to not just tell creatives about, oh, you should do this or whatever, but practical engagements that move you from just being introduced to, the fact that you need to perhaps have e-commerce or have a website or whatever it is, to getting it done, right? And I think that we're gonna see some positive impact from that down the line. Mind you, we still have to contend with, across industries, the major economic fallout that is ahead of us. And I think that none of us want to really grapple with that in terms of the scale and the reality, but it is coming. And so it's also a time for us to look at, the real factor of the economics and how are we going to fund this creativity? How are we going to fund this innovation? Our counterparts in Europe and North America, they have societies, and we can argue about the foundations of those because we know that our ancestors' blood and sweat and tears have funded a lot of that wealth, right? So let's not pretend that it just falls from the sky. But the truth is, they now have the advantage of supporting creatives through a period like this with grant funding that is not tied to, a whole bag of bureaucracy like some of us experience here. To get $10,000, you have to give your blood sample and your firstborn child. I mean, that's not the reality that our counterparts face. And a lot of the funding I've seen also comes with a kind of humanity in it, to say you're an artist, but you're a person, you might live somewhere, you might be, threatened with eviction or not being able to eat or feed your family. And then there's the whole matter of the project and their talent. But we don't have that luxury. So how are we going to innovate through and beyond that is something that we have to look at. From the book industry standpoint, as I said, we're members of the IPA, which is an international body, and we have been looking to them in terms of what's happening in the global space and how we can collaborate with them to see if we can direct some of that funding here. We know that our own local government has not been strong on. There's a strong thing in terms of celebrating our success, but in terms of the hard, sustainable investment, right? There's no magic that is worked when Jamaican writers, for example, we have many of them who have left this space and they're living in other areas, New York, London, wherever. There's no magic that happens. It is that they go into an ecosystem that is properly funded, especially for fiction. Because going back to the points that Kemal and Tanya make, and I don't think we're on different pages. I think if we listen to each other, we're saying the same thing. Mm-hmm. In my presentation, I spoke about data. I spoke about how authorship is being redefined, who is an author, the barriers to entry being lowered. It's all there. But the point is we have to look at things as complementary and not that they're fighting against each other. And that is the lens through which I tend to view. And personally, to wrap up, I just think that COVID, as I said, it is a context that has really, none of us have experienced a pandemic before. I certainly wasn't around when the Spanish flu was here. So it's a new experience for all of us. But I personally think that some of the things that are being highlighted now in terms of the creative industries in particular, of which publishing is a part, these are some issues that existed long before. And yes, there are some unique realities, but there are things that we will have to know urgently. We don't have the luxury of time. There has been a sense of urgency applied. I think that's the major difference. And we're going to have to overcome quickly things like the big trust deficit that we have among us where it comes to working with each other, right? Because you're going to find that with limited resources, the push towards collaboration is not even going to be about me liking you or goodwill or whatever. It's going to be a practical way of surviving and thriving and overcoming this challenge.
Thank you, Latoya. And we see why all of these industries are placed under this massive orange economy, cultural and creative industries. Those who attend each week, you realize that there is hardly any issue, any challenge, any opportunity that is unique to any particular section of the creative and cultural industries. They're all intertwined. And we go to our first question from the chat. How possible is it to grow a local market for audio books?
I guess I'll jump on that.
Go ahead, Kemal.
You shouldn't be thinking local. Oh, hello?
Yes,
hello?
how possible is it to grow a local market for audiobooks?
Yeah, I would say you shouldn't be thinking local. I mean, the digital channels are global. Local is only really if you just choose to advertise in Jamaica, but really and truly with one hashtag, the globe has access. If you put a hashtag on Twitter or a hashtag on Instagram, immediately anybody from around the globe which is searching for audiobook or mystery novel or whatever it is would find it. So don't limit yourself by thinking locally. Jamaica only has 2.8 or 3 million people. 400,000 of those probably have interest. 200,000 of those probably will purchase something online or subscribe. Maybe 50,000 of those are audiobook listeners. So you never want to limit yourself. Local meaning getting local books into the okay, all right, okay, cool. All right, so let me rephrase now. So the Shakina added clarity. She's saying that what we actually meant was she wants to get local audiobooks into the wider.
Right. Local books in the audio market.
Local books. Well, yeah, I mean, it's really just marketing and promotion. One of the things, the benefit of being in Jamaica is that the diaspora is even larger than the population on the island, right? The diaspora, well, I butcher names of my brother. Sorry. Yeah, so one of the things that you have to be cognizant of as a Jamaican, and if you have Jamaican content, we actually have access to the diaspora and just generally the places in the world where Jamaican content is very, very in demand. One of those is Japan, New York, tri-state area, quite a few places actually where Jamaican content is in demand. So what you really have to do is create awareness of that this exists. Somebody cannot buy something they don't know exists. This is a very basic thing in marketing that I try to tell people. If people don't know you exist, they cannot buy. And so what you have to do is try to create enough content around your books. Perhaps, depending on I don't know the book, it's a wide question, but the same point that Tanya made about having those small little snippets and building up an audience around it, immediately you have a global audience. I mean, I was the keynote speaker for a management retreat once. It was the 7th largest aeronautical company in the world, right? They called me and they said, Kemal, we're coming to Montego Bay. This one I didn't fly out, right? Unfortunately. They called me and they said, Kemal, we're coming to Montego Bay. My managers from across the globe, Indonesia, this, that. We're coming to Jamaica. We found you online, right? We found you online and we compared you to 3 speakers and we said that, we want you. And I had done the work before. I had put out the blogs before. I had my website before, kemalbrown.com. All of it was there before. And as a result, the globe was able to find me when they needed me, right? And that's what you really want to do. You want to create a space in which you are not just a local author, but you're an author. And your brand is relevant, your content is relevant to the world, because everyone has experienced heartbreak. That's why love songs sell so well, right? Everyone has gone through certain experiences that twin us. We have what you call twin narratives that you can relate to the stories and et cetera, et cetera. And so that is the basis upon which you want to sell your content, not necessarily where you're from. Made in Jamaica has a vibe to it, clearly, so you use it when you can, but never you just begin creating for Jamaica alone, because you're serving a global audience.
Okay, Kemal, there's another question.
I wanted to speak to that point in particular, just to say, and I don't like to use authors with a massive reputation. I'm always careful when I'm using them to say you can do it too, but just to show that it is possible. Because Kwame Dawes' book has been an audiobooks bestseller for, I think it was in the bestseller list for about 3 or 4 weeks. So that is a Jamaican book or a Jamaican writer that is in the top sellers for Audible. So it is possible. There are lots of dynamics that goes into why a Kwame Dawes book can reach there, but just to say as a theoretical possibility, not only is it a fact that it can happen, but it is happening.
Oh yeah, man. I mean, there's no, as I said, I'm not the only speaker that's, I mean, Nicole McLaren, gone global, Terry Carrell, she's on LinkedIn, crushing. It's really, you know, just tied to putting on. As an author, the thing is, you are literally a storyteller. I don't see how you can lose, because you know how to weave a narrative that's intriguing, dynamic, creative, interesting, based on, that's literally what authors and writers do. So,
yeah, I think the point I would just make quickly, just to wrap up, you both have made good points. For me, I'm big on authenticity. So there are a lot of people who have made it, because social media is a very weird space. There are a lot of people who are looking online for inspiration and something to aspire to, because, you know, maybe in their personal space, there is a gap in terms of even their own understanding of self. It's a very weird time. So you'll have a lot of people who have, you know, a lot of followers, but in real life, it doesn't translate whether to sales or whatever. I find though that there are some individuals, going back to the whole argument about how you position yourself, Kemal was saying, being Jamaican versus just looking at Jamaica as a market. So that's a big distinction. But there are authors that deliberately choose to package their identity as Jamaican. So Kemal, who is, you know, again, Tanya was saying big name. He is a huge name as the Forward Prize winner, the only Black Forward Prize winner, the first one, sorry. But he makes sure that, you know, when the Queen called him, they were wanted to say he's British and then tack on the Jamaican. And he says, no, I'm Jamaican. I'm a Jamaican author living in the UK or England, and that's how I wish to identify. And there's a big market out there, as both Kemal and Tanya were saying, that taps into authenticity. So you'll find a Nicole Dennis Ben, who had to argue with her editors, and I think Marlon James had that struggle before her, who had to argue with her editors because they're saying, who going to read Patois? Nobody understands this, but yet still, their books are selling, which is what really matters. I mean, separate from the impact, there are sales because people are more open to experiencing other cultures, and experiencing what comes with that culture. And we see that going back to the Versus battle, that page, if you're talking about data, grew by over 600,000 followers from that one exposure to Jamaican culture. Some of it was already, you know, people knew of these personalities, and some just experienced it for the first time, but it's converting, right? So we have to balance the argument in terms of going back to the question asked, you know, how can I as a local author tap into a wider audience, which I think is what is being asked. I would say start from having a good, Tanya spoke about editorial, start from having a good product, right? And then you package that accordingly and be authentic in how you package it, because people can spot fakes.
All right, and on that note, we have another question about how you get books to be digitally accessible, and what are the best digital platforms for children's books? Anyone want to take that one? Best digital platform for children?
Repeat the question.
How do you get your books to be digitally accessible? Mm-hmm. And what are the best digital platforms for children's books?
All right, well, I'll make a quick statement and I'll hand over to Tanya, who is a children's publisher in terms of her substantive, you know, activities. I would say there are a lot of, so in terms of, I think the first question really is about conversion or making the material accessible. So after you create it, and you know, for children's book, you might be looking at illustrations and all of that, digitizing that. That's a whole process that you really refer to as conversion. And there are different entities that offer that service. As I pointed out in my presentation, Book Fusion is not only a platform that, you know, you can have a storefront on, but they do offer conversion services, I believe, and they also have a track record of working with entities like Ministry of Education in converting materials that have been created for children. I think they now have like an audio plugin, and they're working on other things, because one of the things I personally find is with children, depending on the age group you're looking at, the experience that you will have as an adult with an ebook, it has to be far more dynamic for a child, especially if it's not within a textbook kind of context. It would have to be far more dynamic in terms of incorporating things like sound and video and interactivity, maybe if you want to color an illustration, you know, or something like that. So as I said, the Book Fusion platform is available locally, and I will hand over to Tanya in terms of talking about maybe what's happening on a wider scale.
I think I'm going to ask the person who asked the question to define when they say children's book, what they mean, because that answer depended on the age group you're targeting. Is it like 0 to 5? Is it, or 0 to 3 really, 4 to 6, or 8 to 12? Which children are you talking about? Checking to see your answer. No? No? Okay, well then let me just speak to it. Right, so as Latoya was saying, part of the challenge with books for younger readers that would have been picture books, so you're talking about 8 and younger, is that because in physical book form, they depend heavily on the visual media. And when you get to the electronic, they need, children need a lot more stimulation. They'll be fine with the book because there's a way, because of the ways in which reading fires your imagination. That's why, while it's not problematic for the child on the page, when for some reason, when they get to the electronic device, then it needs more stimulation, it needs more action, etc. And that means there's no single platform that is best for that. And what a lot of certainly the larger publishers do is that they add in a lot of animation. And while I haven't used them to do it, I know Book Fusion does do a certain amount of limited animation in conversion. So particularly in the Caribbean market, there's that. Once you get higher up, of course, your big players are Amazon, and I think Nook still exists. I'm not 100% sure, but the Kindle is the major player, and that will work even for say an illustrated chapter book. So that's like My Stupid Diary, I think, is one of those books in the
Dark Diaries.
yeah, Dark Diary, I think.
And Dear Dumb Diary.
Yeah, Dear Dumb Diary, that's the one I was waiting for, right? But what you find is that on the e-platform, these books, and they work well on the text because they're very dynamic in their illustration. It's not illustration on one side and then text on the other. You get an interplay with it that is a part of how these books have really fueled children's imagination. And because of the nature of computers, which is what transcribing to E is, it tends to have to be separated. So you find that they don't work as dynamically on those platforms. But your Kindle, etc., is still like your major platform for ebooks at that age group. Hope that answers the question.
I've been on Book Fusion lately as a result of homeschooling. I found it quite interesting, actually. Teacher sent a link one day and said, this is the story that is to be read, and these are the questions. And I was quite pleased with the platform. Okay, so we have another question here. Is having an editor always necessary? What makes a good editor?
We're going to say,
What makes a good editor? Are they necessary?
yes, 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 yes. And let me just add one more for effect. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so an editor plays two roles in your story. Editors act as your surgeon and they act as your midwife. They are the person helping you to birth the story. And sometimes they catch simple things that are related to continuity, because you've had this child with you for ages. And you know the nose cute, and you know everything, the hand look fine, but you didn't realize that one of the fingers never formed so right. And this is what your editor is for. Your editor looks at the work, understands what it is you are trying to do, and says, I see what you're going for, but this is not working, and here is why it is not working. Or this section is working really, really well. You need to replicate more of that. And that is what it is. And there is a way in which a good editor respects what it is the writer is attempting to do and is not trying to write your novel. A lot of people who try to run away from editors say, oh, they want creative freedom. An editor is not trying to get in the way of your creative freedom. Not a good editor anyway. They may push back. I remember I went with a writer to the Brooklyn Book Festival, and he was asked, so what was the process of editing for you? And here I am, standing at the back of the room, and he says, well, it was a lot of emails from my editor going, cut that, cut that, cut that. Ain't nobody want to see that. And so, but it's not that he was unhappy with the process. It was about sometimes you get wrapped up in your own writing and need somebody else to say, I know you really like that, but it's getting in the way of your story, right? And that's how good editors work. And that's why they're necessary.
And a good editor also, or an editor period for any project you're working on, preferably is not your cousin or friend who got a 1 in English or something along that line. I mean, I'm just, without naming, like, that's not, I've come across that and that's not it. So, I know that one of the things that the book industry is trying to do, and we're moving from beyond trying to actually making it happen. There are editors, very good editors across the age spectrum, and also people who are, you have different types of editors. You have technical editors, people who are, into the scientific stuff, fiction, etc. It's to have people be able to easily identify and to contact people who we would, by our own checks and their portfolio, be able to really put forward and say, these are good editors, or these are people you should be considering working with. But really and truly, for any project, I would strongly recommend the temptation to, if your very good friend or relative is an actual editor, that's great, but not the person got a 1 in CXC or CSEC, whatever it is, and knows English. That's not enough, because as Tanya said, good editors can help with things like flow, structure, and even fact checking your work. You might
Very important.
You might be introducing, if it's fiction, you might be referencing a particular period, but you might be, putting a detail in there that somebody who actually knows about history and know that something happened is able to spot it and say, this is nonsense.
All right. And how does one become an editor in Jamaica?
Well, becoming an editor anywhere is pretty much the same. A lot of people take different pathways, right? So because of the nature of our industry, I, for example, didn't start my educational journey as a teen or something saying I want to become a publisher, because I didn't even see at the time anybody or know anybody personally who was a publisher before I met Ian Randall and grasp that reality that, hey, here is somebody who is living and working in Jamaica who is publishing, and it's possible to merge your love of books to how they're produced, right? So I know that a lot of editors are not necessarily taking the conventional route of starting out their educational journey, going to school for editing. But what you find is they tend to have the same kind of profile in terms of people who are very analytical and able to think critically. They are very aware in terms of their own reading, so they read a lot, and so their knowledge base is pretty wide. Of course, things like grammar and being able to identify the difference between copy editing or looking out for grammar and those kind of things versus structural editing, which is knowing that a story is flowing and making sense. All of those things. We are still far off from where we need to be in terms of formal training locally. Most of the editors that I personally know and utilize in my own business, you know, a lot of them have had training outside of Jamaica locally. I know that Carimac has offered, you know, basic editing and proofreading courses. And from time to time, where possible, our industry members or industry association will work with entities who have funding to provide intensive editing courses that will, you know, sharpen the skills of people who come to us with the raw material. So I know entities like British Council and others have put on workshops across the region, Jamaica included, and we have had people come out of that. And coming out of the academic space like a UE and so on, like Cheryl Smart, who, you know, was with UA Library. She is phenomenal in terms of her academic skills. And so she is a very known editor in that space, helping a lot of people, for example, convert their thesis to books and that kind of thing.
Just to add to that, the Lit department coming in September, if September is still a thing, I don't know if it's happening anymore.
Yes.
In terms of the month, they're introducing a new a major in publishing and writing. So it's a combination of studying literature, understanding writing, and understanding publishing. And while that isn't editing intensive, it certainly is a part of putting you on the track. So that's a new thing that will add to what is existing. And one of the things also interesting, Latoya mentioned the workshops that have happened. And this is, as far as I know, it is ongoing, and they're probably going to have a new cadre next year. So it's something to look out for. The British Council has collaborated with the Jamaica Association of Television, Film and Television, JAFTA, and they are training script editors. So, I mean, so it's not only books that require editing, films also require, well, depending on the school. If you're from the British school, they really have script editors. If you're from the Hollywood/American school, they more have script consultants or script doctors, but it's basically the same tools. And so this course is training people to be script editors. So it's called the Film Lab program. So that is something, if you're looking for a training opportunity, is something that you can look out for.
Thank you, Tanya. And this has been a very enriching conversation. Questions are still coming into the chat, but unfortunately we can't take all of them. One of the things about doing these things with creatives, Mr. Davis always says, creatives talk a lot. We talk plenty. It makes a host or moderator's job very easy. And you ladies and gentlemen have been fantastic this morning. We are pleased that we selected the right panel. And Latoya, I am coming over to you now with a question and your spoken word entertainment, which will take us out. Someone wanted to know where we can access your work, and how did you get the book published?
All right. First, the book is available on Amazon, and a local bookstore here in Clarendon. You can get it there if you're from here, or you can just send me a message. On Instagram, I'm at The Wrapped Poet. On Facebook, I'm Black Cross.
You spell that? Spell your Instagram handle?
THE_WRAPD_POET.
All right. And if you have some time, just drop it in the chat as
Sure,
well.
no problem.
Drop your social media handles in the chat for us. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been a wonderful session. Before Latoya takes us out, I want to leave you with a few nuggets. Bev Campbell, staple in these sessions since we started 9 weeks ago. I remember her name, maybe it's because we have the same last name, and Neela Banks are avid attendees at these sessions. Bev pointed out Kingston Creative. Definitely, JBDC has worked with Kingston Creative on several occasions. Last year, Andrea Dempster Chong was a speaker at the Small Business Expand Conference in May. And in November, we had her again at when we spoke about, when we had Raising Capital, talking about financing for creatives during Global Entrepreneurship Week. So Andrea Dempster Chong is part of the extended JBDC family, and Kingston Creative has been doing awesome work. So they're right here with us. I want to leave you with a couple of nuggets before we go to Latoya that stood out for me. There were so many. I mean, we're talking to writers and marketers here. They've said so much, but editors act as surgeon and midwife. Tanya Batson-Savage, don't forget. Don't go get your CSEC distinction person to edit. It don't work so. Oh, by the way, someone asked about training. The Master of Arts in English Language at UWI also takes a very deep dive into editing. You have a first degree and you want to get more training in mastery of the language and become an editor and so on. That's a program that you could check out as well. Adapt or Die, our lone gentleman, Kemal Brown. All of us have stories in us. Latoya West-Blackwood. Stories have power. I think that came from Latoya's slide, but Olive Lewin said it. Also, Kemal, what does the market want? And to show you how we're all saying the same thing, that question was also answered in West-Blackwood's presentation. The future of publishing is about having connections to readers and the knowledge of what those readers want. Question answered. All right. So thanks again for joining us. I'm Suzette Campbell, Corporate Communications Manager at JBDC. JBDC can help writers through our Things Jamaican retail stores, as well as our online store, thingsjamaicanshopping.com, giving you market access for those wonderful publications that tell the Jamaican story. Do check us out. Latoya Cross, our own in-house author, will take us out.
So for my final piece, this one is called Self-Care. Take care of yourself physically. People are impressed by what they see. Don't be pressured in doing something that will cost you mentally. Invest in you financially. Maximize your rewards. Feed your soul spiritually, despite your belief in God's. Love yourself unconditionally, regardless of how you feel. Speak to you positively. You are a big deal. Nurture you emotionally. You can't pour from an empty cup. Put yourself first occasionally before your time is up. Thank you.
All right. Put yourself first occasionally before your time is up. Latoya Cross. Thanks so much for joining us. Do join us again. Follow us on we're everywhere on social media, YouTube, Facebook, everywhere. Join us tomorrow for the Entrepreneur's Journey, when we'll speak to Stephen Spence in another Zoom session like this, the Entrepreneur's Journey. You can check those out on our Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn pages. You'll see everything that we're doing, and do join us. Thank you so much. Have a great day right now.